Spoilers ahead for Lobotomy Corporation and Library of Ruina. If you've ever played Lobotomy Corporation, you should recognize one of its more memorable abnormalities, this fella. We're told that, for our own good, a filter on a filter has to be placed on our monitors in order to prevent even a single visible pixel of this abomination from ever being visible to our sweet, innocent oculi. Would I kill myself for a single glimpse at this abnormality? Absolutely. So, today, let's take the first step and figure out exactly what we're looking at. That's right, today I'm going to be uncensoring censored and unveiling its true form, or at least a representation of that form, maybe. So, without wasting any more time, here's my theory. Censored is the representation of Ian's memory of the smoke monster from the old L-Corp from before the Smoke Wars. If you're satisfied with that explanation, or simply not interested, feel free to leave now. But for the rest of you, it's time to suffer through a deep dive of the evidence. Let's start with my weakest point of evidence and work up from there. In Lobotomy Corporation, both the in-game wing and the game itself use a system called risk levels, ranging from Zayn, the safest, to Aleph, the deadliest. Censored is a part of the Aleph category alongside several others. These several others, excluding backer abnormalities, all appear in the sequel Library of Ruina. However, the one that doesn't is censored. On the surface, this makes sense. Censored was apparently so horrific that even with the cognition filter, a second filter was necessary to block this abnormality completely from sight, and that any information that could reveal what exactly censored was scrubbed to avoid the manager from suffering a mental breakdown. So yeah, I can understand why Angela decided to not unleash that particular abomination on her librarian. Until I actually thought about it. You see, employees in Lobotomy Corporation don't actually use the cognition filter. That's reserved for the manager. After all, how can you observe something you can't actually see? And sure, most employees that witnessed censored went insane. However, it was entirely possible to work with censored and remain sane. The proof is right there when you play the game. What this tells us is either Ian is just a massive pussy, or he has such deep trauma from whatever censored represents that even a mind-wiped version of himself suffers from even the vaguest of reminders. As for the librarians, they should be totally fine to witness it, relatively. So now that I've eliminated why censored can't appear, let's go over why they didn't appear. As I said before, censored is likely a manifestation of Ian's memories of the Smoke Wars. The abnormalities that appear in the library all have some significance to both Angela or Roland, as well as whoever's floor we happen to be on, but censored doesn't actually relate to anyone in the library. Of all the Sephiroth/librarians, only one was alive during the Smoke Wars, Benjamin B, or as most of you would refer to him as, Hockma. Now, the timeline's vague to say the least, but I don't believe Angela had been created until after L-Corp had been founded by Ian, which definitely occurred after the Smoke Wars, though I might be wrong. I read through 4 wiki pages trying to determine the timeline, and I couldn't find any solid dates. So, know that going forwards, I'm assuming she was made after Lobotomy Corporation became a wing. The only other person in the library who was alive during the time of the Smoke Wars was Roland, who actively participated in it and who I'll touch on later. With that out of the way, it's unfortunate but this is the first hole in my theory. As Benjamin was alive during the time of the Smoke Wars and likely one of the instigators alongside Ian, the odds of him not having seen the smoke monster of L-Corp is incredibly unlikely. There is but one saving grace here, however. There's no definitive proof that Benjamin directly participated in the Smoke Wars, and even if he was involved in instigating the war, Ian could have shielded him from witnessing the smoke monster, given how horrifying it seems to have been. That's my best explanation for why censored doesn't appear on Hockma's floor, and as for the other floors, it's quite simple. They have no connection to censored, as they were never alive during the events of the Smoke War, hence they wouldn't have the trauma necessary for censored to trigger anything for them. So that explains why censored doesn't appear in the library. But what if I told you a version of it does appear through Roland? As we know, Roland was an active participant in the Smoke Wars, specifically so that he could earn his way into a nest for himself, his wife, and his unborn child. We even get to witness Roland and Salvador's immediate reaction to witnessing the smoke monster, referred to as L-Corp's singularity. So surely, if censored was to appear in Library of Ruina, it would appear during one of Roland's breakdowns. And I'm here to tell you that it does. During the second phase of the Black Silence fight, when Roland begins to distort into the wielder of suffocating haze, the amalgamation of trauma from his experiences in the Smoke Wars, and the resurfacing memory of the Smoke Monster. Of course, for this to be the case, I'd need to link Censored to the Smoke Monster, so let's do that now, shall we? Unfortunately, in terms of physical appearance, we're kind of screwed. Censored's appearance is, well, censored, both in-game and in its logs, so unfortunately, I can't compare it to the form Roland takes. Instead, let's go over what happens when exposed to Censored. As stated by Randy in the logs, people begin to feel a surge of intrusive thoughts, forget how to count, feel the uncontrollable urge to vomit, start thinking that they aren't at the company anymore, and feel insignificant with an urge to suffocate themselves. So we have our list. Are there any similarities? Well, for starters, and the most obvious, suffocation, disorientation, and delusion are common symptoms of smoke inhalation. That's a good start. There's also evidence that the smoke monster can cause nausea, as Roland vomits when he sees it, and Salvador himself almost joins him. Alas, the only missing symptom appears to be intrusive thoughts. However, this leads to my next point. The urge to suffocate themselves could be interpreted as the victim's urge to suffocate themselves within the smoke of the smoke monster. Now, we know that Censored can use bodies, alive or dead, to create additional mini-Censoreds. It often does this with alive employees and agents by driving them insane and causing them to willfully dive into its clutches. Now, what do we know about the smoke monster? We know that it was L-Corp's singularity, and that it was used to generate power for the city, as both known L-Corps were power companies, with AN exploiting the lack of a power source to become the new wing. It would be entirely possible that the old L-Corp created this power by feeding the smoke monster with biomass, and potentially even straight up throwing humans into it. It wouldn't even be the cruelest use of a singularity was seen, let's be real here. In fact, it's even referenced by Salvador, who states that the lives of thousands of people is worth a handful of this smoke, implying that people are sacrificed to L-Corp's singularity in order to produce the smoke that powers the city. Guess who also has a sacrifice mechanic? We also know from the Black Silence fight that the wielder of suffocating haze can recreate miniature monsters similar to Censored, but unfortunately not one-to-one. Unlike Censored, Roland's version only requires a sacrifice of health, whereas Censored heals when creating its offspring, but requires a body to do so. This can be explained as a difference in how Ayn and Roland perceive the smoke monster, or it could be that Roland's smoke monster is one that has already absorbed countless bodies already, given the context. Rewinding back to Roland's encounter with the smoke monster, there's an interesting line said by Salvador. He mentions that since they have both witnessed L-Corp's singularity, they'd be subject to amnestic treatments. However, the feeling of disgust wouldn't go away. That's pretty interesting, as we can infer that since the feeling of disgust won't go away, that the memory of the singularity isn't truly erased. It's more just blocked or filtered out. One could even say it's been censored, as the memory is still there, just covered up. The feeling of disgust can also be correlated to how Ayan goes insane should he witness any part of Censored, as it's likely the case that Ayan also goes memory wiped in a similar fashion to Roland. However, it seems his willpower, at least while his Manager X, is significantly lower than Roland, Salvador, or even a level 5 employee. This also explains why Roland distorts into the wielder of suffocating haze during the fight, as being forced to confront his past has caused his repressed memories to resurface, and thus the trauma that came with them. But it doesn't end there. Let's go back to the logs from Censored once more. Note this line, Randy, that looks just like how Censored from long ago, doesn't it? Now, this might be a bit of a stretch, but not entirely impossible. My theory is that both Randy and the speaking employees are both ex-employees from the previous L-Corp, rehired into Lobotomy Corporation. It would make sense, given that the old L-Corp employees likely weren't enlisted to fight in the Smoke Wars, and that they would have undoubtedly lived within L-Corp's nest. So why wouldn't they proceed to work for the new L-Corp? They'd need a job after all if they want to stay within the nest. Now, with this in mind, it makes sense that the employee recognizes Censored, because it looks just like L-Corp's singularity that they must have worked with being previous employees. Finally, the log ends with the employee coming to a realization about Censored before shoving his recording device somewhere unspeakable.
Reminds me of an infection I had up my...
What this realization is, I can only guess. However, the fact that he came to a realization at all, whilst also using the words "it reminds me of" and "this is our censored," this is the reason censored exists, shows that he at the very least is familiar with it. This dialogue, combined with my theory that the employee was originally from L Corp, leads me to believe he was witnessing the singularity he used to handle, and coming to the realization that the only reason censored exists is because the smoke monster existed before it. Ironically enough, censored is somehow more horrifying than whatever the original smoke monster had looked like, as he remarks that it's the worst thing he's ever seen in his life. And with that, hopefully I've made my case that Censored's true form is likely a variation of the smoke monster from L Corp, specifically Aen's recollection of it. Before I finish the video, allow me to quickly recap the points I've made. Censored is a representation of Aen's memory of L Corp's singularity, the smoke monster. All Aleph from Lobotomy Corporation are officially present in Library of Ruina, aside from Censored. Roland is the sole witness of the smoke monster, hence why it doesn't make an appearance elsewhere. Further evidence of Benjamin's involvement in the smoke war could disprove this theory. Most of the symptoms exposed to Censored are the same that occur when exposed to the smoke monster. All witnesses of L Corp's singularity had their memories repressed, keeping in theme with Censored, and ex-L Corp employees seem to recognize Censored as something they have previously witnessed. And that's that. While I can't draw from any concrete evidence, I'm hoping that Project Moon's next game, Limbus Company, comes out with something I can use to further support this claim, given how many of its cast seem to have had direct involvement in the smoke wars. You never know, we might even get a proper reveal of Censored roaming freely within one of the derelict branches of L Corp. So, do you agree or disagree with me? Perhaps I missed or overlooked some evidence that disproves my theory, in which case feel free to leave a comment below. I'd love to hear what you guys have to say about all, and whenever I get around to making another video, I hope to see you guys then too. For now, bye-bye.
The company's No! What? There are criminals that need to be locked up that are loose. Who knows what atrocities they're committing? What do you want me to do? One problem at a time. Stop them! So anyways, I started blasting. You what?